If you're a songwriter who is recording themselves at home with one microphone and you want it to sound great, then this video is for you.
This is the track with all of my processing.
At the base of every mountainous climb sits an old happy ending that's past its prime.
And this is the track without any processing.
Mountainous climb sits an old happy ending that's past its prime.
So I've got this song that was sent to me, my friend and client, the fantastic songwriter Tom Harris, aka Tom Harris is okay. He's based over in Argentina. Tom wanted to release just simple acoustic versions of the songs, which he's recorded live, single take, one microphone. And I'm just kind of polishing those up really, and I thought it'd be useful because I think quite a lot of people do record in this way, either with a good microphone or a cheap microphone, often in not perfectly acoustically treated rooms. So you end up with something that's quite good, but often needs just a little bit of help. I've got the recording here. I'm just going to talk through what I did. It's called the Climb Acoustic. So to start with, it's just a single mono recording that you sent, one take, one microphone, vocal and guitar. So this is what it sounds like with no processing, no effects, no nothing. Guitar intro.
At the base of every mountainous climb sits an old.
It's just the quiet part of the song, and then if we listen to a bit of the louder part.
As we spin around the sun, or out in space.
So yeah, it's a good recording. It's a great performance. Just needed some help to bring it to life and give it some more impact, a bit more richness. So I've got two ways I've done this. I've got a channel strip, which is unique to this particular recording, which I've got on the actual track itself, and then I've got a master bus with a bunch of plugins which I use for all of the projects that I have like this, and a lot of the plugins on my master bus are ones I use on all of my mixes. But first off, I wanted to run through what I've done on the channel. I recently got this amazing Neve emulation. It's called Lindell 80, and it's actually by Plugin Alliance. I got it on a deal, and it's been compared to the Neve hardware, and people saying that it's just identical. I'm very impressed by it. Really, I use this because the character of those old Neve desks is what it's all about. They're rich, they add warmth, the EQs are very musical, compression's got a nice dry wet mix on there, and it's got a nice way of compressing things. And of course you've got the drive preamp gain which you can use. So I'm using it a few different ways. First off, I'm using it to add a very, very tiny amount of top end boost at 12k, but really subtle, like 1.46 dB of boost. The same at 7.2 on the next EQ down. I like 7.2 for drums as well, for snares and cymbals sometimes, but there's a lot of kind of, if you're an acoustic guitar, a lot of the energy of a performance is in that kind of higher mid-range or high frequencies, so that's just adding a little bit more energy. These are very small little moves I'm doing. 110k on the next one. Again, these are all little subtle boosts because I wanted it to feel a bit warmer and a bit bigger, and 110 is a great frequency for that. So that's it on. If I turn it off. Now I am driving the input. Up here on the left there's an input fader which you can use to actually add what would be input gain, and then the THD, which is the kind of preamp modeling that is so good in this plugin. I've got that engaged as well. Compression wise, I've got 41% compression at 2:1 ratio, and really if you look at this fader here, it doesn't really do anything until the louder parts of the song. You can see it's only really doing some light compression.
As we spin.
And I just like the character it imparts. It's very, very subtle. Next up, I'm doing some more surgical EQ on a dynamic basis with the Pro Q3 by FabFilter. And if you look at this in action, some very light touch dynamic EQ, around 150, 159. There was a bit of boominess in the guitar, so that's dynamically reducing when it hits a certain threshold. Same thing at 3.8. Tom's vocal has a particularly kind of prominent frequency at 3.6 or kind of 3k-ish. So I'm pulling that down dynamically, and then another peak frequency which I'm controlling is 886.
So hard to be left behind.
And again, it's only by 3 dB-ish. They're really not very big changes, but what they'd be doing is they'll be helping the sound will be more even. At moments where those frequencies are just a touch harsh and might make it feel a little bit awkward or unprofessional or unbalanced, then these are just going to control that. And I'm doing a low end cut, but really that's only the super low end, just in case there's any mic rumbles or anything that we don't want. So that's the Pro Q3. Next up, I've got a fantastic compressor which I've set to some very light touch again settings, but this is doing gain reduction slowly and evenly, down to about -3 dB on some of the louder parts. If you look at this here, look at the gain reduction.
As we spin around.
I like how subtle, transparent and sensitive this plugin is by Tokyo Dawn Labs. Basically it's a free plugin, but I use it sometimes for mastering, and it's just very good at not being too over the top. I'm blending in the dry mix a little bit there, so it's a parallel compression, and I'm giving it some makeup gain, and that is adding some loudness
Time.
just to boost the whole thing up a little bit. Now, one thing about these recordings when they're just mono with one mic is they can sound a little bit flat, and when you're listening to them on headphones particularly, they just sound like they're flat. They're not acoustically in a space that you can perceive. I've added a little bit of that with a couple of different plugins. There's a plugin called Dear VR which I use. Don't normally use it on whole mixes, but when you've got a single microphone, this is a great way to position the sound, so it's quite 3D, and you can use this really dramatically, and you can move a sound in a 3D space. That's why it's called VR, because it's meant for sort of VR audio where you're going to be sort of spatially immersed. But I'm actually just using it to position the audio of this sound right sort of inside the head, and you can see that I've positioned it right sort of as if the sound is right there. It makes it feel like it's actually coming more from around you. So
as we spin around.
if I turn it off and on, you'll kind of feel the difference. This is off.
As we spin
It's off.
around the sun.
Quite flat. If I turn this on now,
Out in space, a chase goes on. In around the sun. Out in space.
my main reason for using this was so it's more real, slightly more immersive, as if you're there. So that's the chain that I'm using on the channel strip. Now, if I look at my master bus output, it's a bit more involved. The trick here is to have every plugin just doing a subtle thing that it does really well, and then stack them up, and it compounds into something that sounds how you want it to sound. But the first thing I use is the BX Master Desk, which is a mastering plugin by Plugin Alliance and Brainworks. It's doing some parallel compression.
Out in space, a chase.
It's doing a little bit of stereo enhancement to the whole mix.
Chase goes on to catch a light deer.
And I'm actually using it a little bit to add some volume. When you put this plugin on a track, it just sort of improves it. It's got some magic sauce. Next, my favourite compressor to use on a mastering bus and things like vocals and things, just for its warmth. I very rarely use it to do lots of heavy compression. The El-Ray by Acoustic Audio and Greg Wells. So if you look at the compression it's doing, it's very little, but what this does, this particular compressor, is it just has some magic that feels warmer, feels like glue. In a busy mix, this glues things together. It works well on everything, so I have it permanently on my master bus, and I swear it helps my things sound warmer. I have it filtered here, so it's not compressing anything below sort of 100 Hertz, which is negligible here. It's got a slow attack and a fast release, so it's not squashing anything. And really, if you look at the compression, it's barely going to 1 dB. So if I turn it off, back on,
I know it all seems so good at the
and really, if you're on headphones or good speakers, you'll be able to hear that subtle warmth and that subtle chunkiness that it's adding. Next up, the Oxford Inflator. This plugin's amazing. There may well be other things on the market that does it, but if you get it on the sale, I got this for 30 quid, I think. But it's basically just a magic wand in regards to making things louder without them actually being louder. So perceived loudness. is what it's doing. If I turn it on and off,
At the time, but oh time, oh time.
if I exaggerate it,
As we
that's
spin around the
off.
sun, well, out in space a chase goes on.
I'm only using it subtly. You can really push this thing and you can really make a track sound like massively pumping. And then I'm putting down the output just a touch just to control it. But really what this is doing is it's doing clever saturation and harmonic distortion to make things seem louder when they're not, measurement wise, they're not actually louder. I love it. Don't really fully know what it's doing, but I recommend getting it. Next up, the Pro Q3 I'm using on this here, which is doing a couple of small things. A little bit of de-essing around that frequency. I didn't really want to de-ess this mix properly because it will start to cause issues with the guitar strumming and stuff. So,
Catch a light divine.
around 1000 hertz, Tom's voice and guitar does get a little bit intense, so I'm just doing dynamic EQ around there.
And the way with all its sticks and its spines.
Yeah, I love using the Pro Q3 for the dynamic EQ. Just it's a nice way of controlling things without using compression. So next up I'm using another saturator, and really kind of out of habit, but I love it. It's the Black Box HG2 by Plugin Alliance and Brainworks. And in this case I'm using it in a parallel way, so I'm only blending it in 50% mix and putting the output down. This is another tool that I use to increase loudness, perceived loudness. It imparts a nice tonal quality to things because the saturation algorithm is really, really amazing and very musical. So it doesn't feel like it's saturating things in a way that's like crusty or over the top like tape saturation. This is doing something entirely different. This is on. That's off.
And the way with all its sticks and its spines, and you're trying so hard.
One way I describe that really is it just adds some more life to things. It feels like the energy levels go up, and sometimes that's what you want. I think I can tell because the strumming pattern of this song is very rhythmic, it's got a lot of kind of life in the strumming. I wanted to really accentuate that and allow people to hear the intricacies of the guitar, and that was something that wasn't really coming through on the recording when it was sent to me. Love that plugin, another one that I highly recommend getting. Now I'm using the N4, which is the plugin suite by Acoustic Audio. It's got lots of great different plugins within one suite, so it doesn't look like much. And I generally use it on my master bus for tape because they've got these fantastically accurate and faithful sample-based emulations of real tape machines. On this track I'm using it just as a sort of way to add that a real tape feel. I know it's doing what a Studer would do, let's just let it do that. But if you listen, you might be able to tell.
And oh, it all seems so good at the time, but oh time, oh time, oh time.
Yeah, I think what it does is it takes some of the air and space out of things when they're moving around and just brings them together. So in this case, guitar and vocal both in the same track, but there is sort of quite a big sonic dynamic range in both of those parts. And what tape does is it generally just squash things down a little bit or glue them together, both abstract terms, but when people describe tape saturation or that tape feeling or sound, it's often to do with the fact that things just feel like they're glued together, just by the very nature of what tape is. Again, I'm using a Studer, I believe a Studer preset. No input gain, no output gain. It's just imparting its sonic quality, and that's it. So then I'm using a multi-band compressor by FabFilter, the Pro MB. I'm using for some expanding and control of the high mids.
Oh time, oh time, oh time.
Without it,
The chase goes on to catch a light divine.
it's something I do a lot, but I get quite excited with my saturation and making things sound more energetic, and then a multi-band compressor is like a compromise. It can actually help keep that energy but then just control it, and I'm not doing anything too dramatic, and I'm only using the low end and the high mids. It's just balancing things out. Finally, a limiter, which on this mix I decided to use this free limiter called Loud Map.
And free, but still evade.
And I've got it doing hardly any limiting because there's quite a lot of volume coming out of these other plugins. So very subtle limiting. And so technically that's being mastered in this process. So the other thing I haven't talked about is the room reverb I'm using. So as well as that DVR thing that I'm using to position the sound, I'm actually adding a subtle bit of the room reverb from another plugin within the N4 suite, which is a real studio space that they've modelled and sampled. And so I like adding this because it makes it feel like it was recorded in a real studio. But I'm only adding it in small amounts. So this is what it sounds like actually on its own, that reverb. It's very, very convincing. I'm pulling out the low frequencies using this shelf EQ quite dramatically. Anything below sort of 150 on a shell, and I'm also putting the highs out, and one of the frequencies from Tom's vocal, which is a particularly dominant one, because I don't want this reverb to be compounding and adding more tone. So I'm just sculpting that reverb with an EQ. That's what it sounds like on its own, and then in the track,
Out in space, a chase.
I like to use room reverbs in a way where you can't really tell they're there unless they're not there.
Goes on to catch a light divine.
That's without it.
And free, but still evade.
As soon as it's on, it's like, okay, here we are, we're in a place. And I think the human ear likes to hear that, particularly on headphones. It'll be less obvious on speakers, but really, I'm not doing this for obviousness. I'm doing this just for that natural feeling. And this is the track with all of my processing.
At the base of every mountainous climb sits an old happy ending that's past its prime.
And this is the track without any processing, as it was sent to me.
Mountainous climb sits an old happy ending that's past its prime.
So I hope that was helpful. If you're recording stuff yourself at home and you're just like never really happy with how it comes out, you can try some of these things, or you can send it to me to have a go. This took me an hour and a half max, so it's not a big thing that takes hours and hours. So I think you'll agree it sounds a lot more present, a lot more energetic, a lot richer, and all of those things are what I love about music, particularly the older kind of style of like acoustic recordings. You know, those artists who are recording in very expensive studios with Neve consoles and with lots of saturation and character. That's kind of what I'm trying to get here. And also the room reverb is an old room that they've sampled from an old studio. So I feel like I'm trying to kind of impart that character onto this track that was recorded in a front room in someone's house. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've got any recordings you want me to help you do this with, or if you want to work with me as a producer or a mixer, just drop me a message.